Hey grade 6s, I want to talk to you about multiplying and dividing numbers by 10, hundreds, thousands, and even 10,000s, and show you how easy that is. So the first thing is I want us to fill in this chart. And if we start with the number 79 and we multiply it by 1, what are we going to get? Well, 79. Now whenever we have a 79, what is always after the 9? What is always after the ones column? It's a decimal point, and that decimal point can become very important when we get into further ones. So now we're asked to multiply by 10. Well, the same as if you were asked to multiply 8 by 10, you would get 80. You would move the decimal point over 1 and fill it with a 0. So in this case, you take 79 times 10, you're going to add a 0 or move that decimal point over one spot. So you would get 790. Let's look at multiplying by 100. You would move a decimal point over one more. In fact, you move it 2 spots from the original because you've got 2 zeros in the question. And so you'd end up with an answer of 7900. And then remember that invisible decimal is always at the end. When you multiply by 1,000, you've got 3 zeros. So you're going to move that decimal 3 spots over and fill it with zeros. So you're going to end up with 79000 for our 3 zeros, so 79,000. And remember that invisible decimal has been moved. Because you've multiplied 79 times 1,000, that decimal point's been moved once, twice, 3 times, and you have to fill those place value spots with those zeros in it. So multiplying 10,000, we count the zeros. 1, 2, 3, 4. So you're going to start with your original number of 79, and then you're going to add those 4 zeros. So 1 0, and then we got 1, 2, 3 more to go. And then our invisible decimal point goes on the end. So we get 790,000. Now, that decimal point becomes very important when we do the next thing, and that is we're going to divide. And we're going to divide by the various numbers that we've got in this chart. Just let me get rid of this. There we go. So we're going to take our original number, 79, and we're going to divide by 1. So in other words, you've got 79 groups. You divide them into one group. Well, you're going to have 79 in the same group. So that's 79 and then a visible decimal. Now, if you divide it by 10, now this is where the decimal becomes very important because you've got the 79 and the decimal there. Well, up here, we move the decimal point to the right because we're multiplying the number. We're making it bigger. Whereas here, we're dividing the group, so we're making it smaller. We're dividing it into smaller sections. So instead of moving the number or the decimal point to the right, we have to move the decimal point to the left. So that decimal point, instead of being 79 decimal, it's going to move over so that it is over one spot and between the 7 and the 9. So when we're dividing by 10, there's 1 0, so you're going to move that decimal point 1 spot to the left and make that number slightly smaller. Now the same thing holds true when we're dividing by 100. You've got 2 zeros, so you're going to take that original number of 79 and that invisible decimal point, but now what you're going to do is you're going to move that decimal 2 spots over, and it's going to end up in front of the 7. And just to make sure that someone knows that that's not just a dot on the paper, we put a 0 in front of it to prove that it is really 0.79. And remember that this is less than 1 now. This is a decimal number. So what if we're dividing by 1,000? How many zeros do you have? 1, 2, 3 zeros. So we move that decimal point 3 spots from the original. Here it is in the original. So watch that. You're going to go 1 between the 7 and 9, 2 in front of the 7, and we're going to go 3. We'll have to add 1 more 0. So we end up with an answer of 0.079. And now for dividing by 10,000, there are 1, 2, 3, 4 zeros. So we're going to have 4 spots that decimal is going to move. Remember, with this question, we had it 3, 1, 2, 3 spots that decimal moves. Now we're going to bring it 4 spots. So we're going to have 0.0079 and a very small number. So that's how you would multiply and divide by the numbers 10 to 10,000. But what happens if we're going to multiply by a smaller number than 1? So here's our number, 79, and we're going to say, okay, what if we multiply it by 1/10? Well, now we're multiplying by a number that's less than 1. And so our answer is going to be less than 1. So multiplying by 1/10 is the same as dividing by 10. So you're going to end up with something called 7.9, because that decimal point has to move 1 spot between the 7 and the 9. It's moving 1 to the left now, because instead of multiplying, making it bigger, because we're now multiplying by a number smaller than 1, we're actually going to make the number smaller. So instead of 79 things, we now have 7.9. Over here, we've got 2 decimal points. We've got, or I'm sorry, 1 decimal point, but 2 decimal placeholders. We've got the 10th and the 100th. So you are actually multiplying by 100th. So that's if you took one whole and you divided it into 100 parts, we're taking one of those parts and we're multiplying by that. So we're going to get a very small number. You've got 2 placeholders, the 1 and the 0, so you have to move that decimal point. So if it started here, the 79 decimal, now we're going to move that decimal point 2 spots to the left, and we're going to end up with a number that says 0.79, which you'll notice is exactly the same as if we divided by 100. So dividing by 100 and multiplying by 100th gives you exactly the same answer. And just one more example here. If we're multiplying by 1,000th, can you figure out which one it's going to look like on the division side? Yeah, it's going to look like dividing by 1,000ths. And so you're going to end up with an answer of 0.079. And that whole reason is you've got 1, 2, 3 placeholders, so that decimal point has to move from behind the 9. Between the 7 and 9 is 1. In front of the 7, that's 2. And then over here, so that's 3 spots to give us the answer. The last thing we want to look at is what happens if we divide by a number smaller than 1. So we're going to take our number 79, and when we divided by something bigger than 1, the number became smaller. So now that we're dividing by something smaller than 1, the number is going to become bigger. Right. So instead of 79, in order for the number to be bigger, which way are you going to move the decimal point? To the left or to the right? You're going to move it to the right. And so it's going to become 790. If you divide by 100, there are 2 placeholders, so you're going to move that decimal 2 spots to the right, and you're going to end up with 7,900, which is the same as if you multiplied by 100. So multiplying by 100, dividing by 100th gives you exactly the same answer. And the last one, what happens if we divide by 1,000th? Well, it's going to give you the same answer as if you multiplied by 1,000th. And that is going to be 79,000 to get you the answer the same as multiplying by 1,000. So I hope this helps you understand that multiplying by tens, hundreds, and thousands, and 10,000s, you just move the decimal one spot to the right. When you divide by tens, hundreds, thousands, and 10,000s, you move the decimal point one point to the left. But if you multiply by something smaller than 1, the number's going to get smaller. And so you move the decimal point, the number of placeholders that it has. When you divide by a number smaller than 1, the same thing. You move that decimal the same number of spots as you've got placeholders, but the number's going to get bigger. I hope that clarifies things. Enjoy.